This is From Rubble to Roots, a podcast from the Center for Jewish History, brought to you with support from Ancestry. This series explores Holocaust survivor stories set against the backdrop of the history that shaped, shattered, and reshaped their lives. I am Miriam Malka Frankel, your host, and in this episode, Sabina Barash shares the remarkable story of her mother, Judith, a Holocaust survivor whose strength helped shape the next generation. Today, we hear the story of Judith.
My name is Sabina Barash. I'm the daughter of two survivors, Judith Koppel and Philip Barash. In Yiddish, his name was Fischel. His given name was Yithiel. Though I carry both those stories close to my heart, today I wanted to share the story of my mother, Judith. Judith was born in 1920 or 1921 in Trembowla, a small town that was then eastern Poland, now part of Ukraine. She often told me the sun was always shining before the war. And it's that light, the laughter, the freedom that defined her early childhood. She was a tomboy. She was fearless and full of life. You'd find her climbing the fruit trees in the family's orchards, her fingers stained from ripe cherries, sometimes crafting drop earrings out of them with her friends. She was the only girl on her swim team, training in the river, and she was its fastest swimmer. Her heart was wide and big enough for everyone, people, animals, even a scrappy little cat she once adopted from outdoors and boldly sat down on her parents' floral bedspread, much to their dismay. As a child, she sat in her grandfather Zisha's lap, braiding his long beard with ribbons. He delighted in those moments. Zisha was Trembowla's Dion. And as she grew older, he took pride in her curiosity, her deepening knowledge of Judaism, a faith that he believed must be balanced with education. Her father, Isaac Wolf Koppel, known as Wolf, was born in 1893. He never had the chance to attend gymnasium schooling. Instead, he stayed behind after World War I to run the family's businesses. He had served in the Austro-Hungarian army as a baker, and my family has a few pictures of him in uniform and others in his apron, and both showing the man that we loved very dearly. As for my mother, she was an exceptional student. She studied Hebrew with private tutors and attended secular schools, dreaming of becoming a lawyer, a rare path open to Jewish women at the time. She graduated from gymnasium in 1939. In her schooling years, most of her classmates and professors were Catholic and anti-Semitic, but her closest friends were similar-minded young Jewish girls. Tragically, only a small few of them survived the war. The Koppel family was proud, educated, and deeply religious. My grandmother, Sabina Koppel was a common surname. My namesake was strong, kind, and generous to a fault. Once she gave her best winter coat to a poor stranger, saying simply, "That woman needed it more than I do." Their home was strictly kosher, with holidays and festivals observed meticulously. But Sabina did not cover her hair, which was a quiet rebellion against local custom, and my grandfather shaved his beard, another scandal in their community. And though they were prosperous, they dreamed of a better life in America, away from the heavy weight of Polish anti-Semitism. But Zisha Koppel forbade it. Immigration was still possible, but many who had left found it impossible to maintain an observant Jewish life in America. To him, preserving their faith was everything. So they stayed in Trembowla, and that decision, which is rooted in faith and love, ultimately cost my grandmother her life.
Trembowla was one of many shtetls that dotted Galicia, a borderland region that for centuries bore witness to the ebb and flow of empires, cultures, and peoples. Situated in what was eastern Poland before World War II, and now part of western Ukraine, Galicia was home to a richly diverse population. Poles, Ukrainians, Jews, and others, each with deep historical roots and traditions. Before the war, 20% of Trembowla's population was Jewish, reflecting the long-standing and vibrant Jewish presence in the region. For generations, Jews across Galicia built synagogues, schools, and communal organizations that were the heart of religious, cultural, and social life. Economically, Jews were often merchants, shopkeepers, artisans, and traders, connecting small towns and cities through networks of commerce and exchange. They also made significant contributions to scholarship and religious thought, nurturing yeshivas and supporting centers of Jewish learning that attracted students from all across Eastern Europe. Yet despite their contributions and rich cultural life, Jews in Galicia lived with a constant awareness of vulnerability. Anti-Semitism had long simmered beneath the surface. Pogroms, violent attacks on Jewish communities, had erupted sporadically in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly during periods of political upheaval. In the interwar years, as Poland re-emerged as a sovereign nation after World War I, anti-Semitic sentiment became more entrenched, expressed in nationalist politics, hostile press coverage, and everyday discrimination. Jews were often scapegoated in economic crises, faced barriers in education and employment, and were excluded from many aspects of public life. By the late 1930s, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The rise of Nazi Germany and fascist governments elsewhere in Europe intensified threats to Jewish communities across the continent. With the invasion of Poland in September 1939, the lives of Trembowla's Jewish residents and millions like them were irrevocably changed. Borders shifted again, and with that came occupation, persecution, and ultimately annihilation.
Okay, as you now know, Poland was invaded in 1939, but shortly after the Soviets joined in and arrived from the east. Trembowla, my mother's home, was caught in the middle. So first came the bombings. My mother remembered the sky turning black, buildings crumbling, and neighbors dying in the streets. And then came the looting. The Koppel home, once elegant and full of lovely objects, was emptied. Furniture, silver, books, all gone. Still, she survived that. Even after the Soviets seized and nationalized my grandfather's mill and orchard, they kept going. But in 1941, the Germans came back. And this time, they brought the final solution.
In August 1939, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that shocked the world. Hidden within was a protocol dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, and Poland was carved in two. Trembowla, along with much of eastern Galicia, fell under Soviet control. The Soviet occupation brought drastic changes. Private businesses and industries were nationalized, synagogues, schools, and Jewish organizations were shuttered or repurposed. The Soviets, suspicious of religious and communal identity, cracked down on expressions of faith and community life. For many Jews, the repression was suffocating. Some chose to flee further east into the Soviet interior, hoping for safety, and others were caught in mass deportations to remote regions like Siberia and Kazakhstan, victims of Stalin's sweeping purges and forced relocations. But this uneasy Soviet hold would not last. In June 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union, shattering the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact and sweeping through eastern Galicia with brutal speed. Within days, German troops, also called Wehrmacht troops, occupied towns like Trembowla, overturning the brief Soviet era. What followed was a terrifying and systematic campaign. The Nazi regime immediately began implementing anti-Jewish laws and policies designed to isolate, dispossess, and ultimately destroy Jewish communities. Jewish businesses were forcibly closed, synagogues desecrated, and communal life torn apart. In many places, the Nazis enlisted local collaborators, neighbors, sometimes even former friends, to identify Jews, enforce curfews, and carry out arrests. Ghettos were established, overcrowded, walled-off quarters, where families were crammed together under horrific conditions. Hunger, disease, and violence were constant threats. For those trapped inside, survival became a precarious balance of luck, instinct, faith, and sheer will. The vibrant Jewish world that had thrived in towns like Trembowla for centuries was being erased, piece by piece, under the shadow of the final solution.
My family was soon imprisoned in the Trembowla ghetto. Despite the starvation and horrific conditions, most of them managed to survive until the liquidation. My mother washed herself with snow during the winter due to the lack of access to clean water in an effort to prevent louse-borne illnesses. The Trembowla ghetto was liquidated in 3 waves from April through June 1943. Most of my mother's family was shot to death on April 7, 1943. There had been rumors of the impending liquidation for weeks. Ghetto residents tried to find hiding places. My grandmother had a bit of food she wanted to bring to her family of origin, and that is how she was caught. She and several hundred others, including most of the maternal family, were forced to strip down to their underwear and marched to a mass grave in a suburb of Trembowla, where they were shot to death. My mother later found one of her shoes. The few remaining Jews desperately searched for new hiding places. An aunt and uncle offered to take my mother with them to their underground hideout. but she had a strong sense of foreboding and declined. Not long after they were discovered and shot, when a dog began digging at the spot where they were hiding. My mother and grandfather survived thanks to a woman most would overlook, their former maid, a Polish Catholic peasant. This woman, raised with anti-Semitism all around her, risked her life and the life of her family to hide them. In her barn, in her pigsty, even under her floorboards. My mother tutored her children and even taught them Latin for church. The two little girls knew that my mother and grandfather were Jewish and that they had been wonderful to their mother.
Most Jews in Trembowla did not survive, but a few did thanks to rare acts of courage like this one. Those who helped Jews during the war faced the risk of arrest, torture, execution, or having their homes burned, yet some chose to act. Today, Yad Vashem honors these individuals as a title called Righteous Among the Nations.
The Russians won that area back from the Germans and the war was over. It was still very dangerous, especially for women, and my mother never went anywhere without a male accompanying her. There were many Jews in the unit that liberated Trembowla, and they wanted my mother to become a swim coach in Russia. My mother and grandfather did not want to live in Russia, if only because they worried that their bourgeois background would be held against them at some point. She and Grandpa managed to reach the American sector. Mother wanted to settle in what was then British Mandate Palestine, but Grandpa wanted to go to America, where Antoni, his sister, had settled. He, my mother, and the former maid remained on excellent terms until the Iron Curtain slammed down and they lost contact with her. I remember my parents sending her parcels of things she had requested, like lace for her daughter's trousseaux. My mother spoke of her in only the most complimentary tones. It is one of the greatest regrets of my life that I never learned her name so that she could be formally acknowledged as a righteous Gentile. My mother and grandfather were eventually taken to a displaced person camp in Germany, at first a tent camp. General Eisenhower himself visited, and after seeing the terrible conditions, ordered improvements. My mother knew that it was somebody important because his entourage all had very highly polished boots. Eventually, they were moved to proper barracks in Fernwald. My uncle Launik survived the Red Army and found them. They had a very joyous reunion. He was a gentle, funny, and kind person. They immigrated to America in 1946, settling in Brooklyn, and there my mother met my father, Philip, or Fischel, also a survivor. They married in 1949 and began a new life together.
In 1945, when World War II finally ended, the world was confronted with the staggering and horrific reality of the Holocaust. Over 90% of Galicia's Jewish population, numbering hundreds of thousands, had been systematically murdered. Cities like Lvov, once home to thriving Jewish communities, villages like Buchach and small towns like Trembowla were left virtually devoid of Jewish life. Synagogues destroyed or repurposed, schools closed, and the vibrant voices silenced forever. The enormity of the genocide was almost impossible for many to grasp. How could modern, civilized societies allow such widespread, calculated destruction to occur? How could neighbors betray neighbors? And how could entire communities be wiped off the map with such brutal efficiency? The shock reverberated globally, challenging humanity's understanding of cruelty, indifference, and complicity. In the immediate aftermath, millions of survivors found themselves displaced, homeless, often without families, and facing uncertain futures. Displaced person camps were established by the Allies across Europe to provide these survivors temporary shelter. One of the largest was Frauenwald near Munich, which became a center for Jewish survivors from Poland, Hungary, and other devastated communities. In these camps, survivors began the slow and difficult process of rebuilding their lives, sharing their stories, relearning trades, forming new communities, and navigating the complex and often frustrating path to immigration. For many, emigrating to the United States or other countries represented a hard-won second chance, an opportunity to start anew after unimaginable loss. But this new beginning was never free from the weight of memory, as survivors carried with them the scars of their past, survivor's guilt, and the responsibility to rebuild.
My parents talked about the war all the time. We lived in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, which was a very Jewish neighborhood filled with survivors. The Holocaust was widely discussed not only in home, but also in the media and public schools. The majority of my parents' friends were survivors, so I heard about the war from my earliest years. My mother told me all sorts of memories some later about the fiancé she lost, Hirsch Mayman, who was killed in a labor camp, and others about her classmates, nearly all gone. And one that hurt so deeply was the story of her father burying Sabina's father, who had been shot earlier in the day, and how her former teacher, a Christian anti-Semite, later planted carriages over the grave. It was neither a sign of respect nor an attempt to protect the grave. My mother, Judith Koppel, lived with dignity. She never forgot who she was or where she came from. She held on to her faith, her values, and the memory of those she loved. She died in 1998. Her memory really is a blessing. But through her, through my children, and now through this story, she lives. My name is Sabina Barash. I'm proud to be a child of survivors, and this was my mother's story. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to From Rubble to Roots, a podcast from the Center for Jewish History brought to you with support from Ancestry. We thank Sabina Barash for sharing Judith's story, a legacy of survival, remembrance, and the quiet strength that echoes through generations. The town of Trembowla, once home to a thriving Jewish community, exists today without them, but through stories like these, their lives are not forgotten. Every family has a story. If you or someone you know is a child of Holocaust survivors and would like to share that story with us, we invite you to be a part of this living archive and podcast. To learn more or to record an episode, email gi@cjh.org. Again, that's gi@cjh.org. I am Miriam Malka Frankel. Thank you for listening and for helping carry these stories forward.